We can call it a day. The head of the legal department of the construction company neatly folded the documents into a plastic folder and smiled. Gentlemen, I suggest we finish our meeting in the restaurant. There is an excellent seafood restaurant at the hotel. The table is set and we can go down right now. The deputy general manager hospitably waved his hand in the direction of the elevators. I sighed. We had just signed a lucrative contract for which our firm had worked for years. But the last thing I wanted was to spend the evening in a restaurant. To be honest, I missed Samantha and my son. We have been living together for 5 years, but I still, like a boy, lose my head at the sight of his wife. I guess I'm a one-woman man and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm having a hard time separating from my family. As I put the signed papers together, I wondered what reason I could come up with for going home today. If I leave now, I will be home by morning. True, it's a pretty decent ride, almost 500 kilometers. But that's all right, I'm used to long distances and contingencies. Ever since I served in the army, Victor, I'm very embarrassed, but I won't be able to take part in the banquet. There are problems at home, so I'm leaving right now. In any case, you will visit our firm in the near future, and I will do my best to make up for my departure today. I came up with an excuse on the fly, and now try not to look the CEO in the eye. It's okay, Edward, the banquet is not an end in itself. I think we still have everything ahead of us. Victor smiled and we shook hands firmly. In my room, I changed my clothes. I packed a shirt and a business suit in a plastic bag. I put on my usual camouflage gear, laced up my combat boots, and put a silver medallion on a leather lanyard around my neck. I felt much freer and more confident in these clothes. Without wasting time, I threw my things in the car, checked the spare tire, and after half an hour, drove off the ring road onto the highway leading to my hometown. I was fine at home, no problems at all. I just wanted to hurry up and hug my beloved wife and son. Gradually it was getting darker. It was early autumn. The prolonged rains and the first frost were still far away. The road was deserted. Only at the bends did the roadside bushes stare at me, caught in the dark by my car's headlights. The engine ran smoothly without strain. I slightly depressed the accelerator pedal, bringing the speed up to 120 kilometers per hour, the cruising speed of my car. My grandfather, my father's father, was holding on confidently to the seat of the general director of the metallurgical plant. I don't know how, but after a while he became its owner. In these turbulent times he managed not only to save the combine and jobs, but also to take the leading position in his industry in our country through reconstruction. As time went on, the plant prospered. My grandfather managed to buy and build several more factories, expanding the scope of his activities. One of the new activities was the organization of production of steel structures for construction. This line of business was headed by his son, my father. Today, on his behalf, I signed a lucrative contract for the manufacture and supply of steel beams for a huge construction company, bringing my father's firm to a new level. But despite some autonomy, my grandfather had all the strings to run the huge household. There were 2 of us in the family, me and my brother. We are twins. We are in our 30s. Untrained people can't tell us apart. At first, even our parents could hardly tell us apart. I was the eldest, and 20 minutes after I was born, Johnny was born. And that decided everything in my fate. I don't know why, but my parents gave all their love to their youngest son, having to put up with my existence. Everything was for Johnny: toys, classes, tutors. I, as the eldest, had to defer to my younger brother in everything. My interests and desires did not interest anyone. Johnny went to tutors, studied music. He always wore a clean suit and learned good manners. I grew up on my own. I learned to play guitar by myself and joined the martial arts section. My grades were average, but after 9th grade I pushed my studies and soon I was in the top 5 in my class. I was easy in the exact sciences and I was going to go to the Mechanical Engineering Institute. But life decided otherwise. In the 11th grade I fell in love. The girl was wonderful. Our relationship was serious enough, and we decided to get married right after high school. Lena was also going to go to university. We decided to be a couple and live together in the dorms, thanks to the fact that they were willing to give us a room. I took everything into consideration except one thing. 2 weeks before the wedding, when I had already bought the rings, Lena called me and hesitantly asked to meet. We agreed to meet in the park near the fountain. I arrived early and had time for a smoke, waiting for the bride. Finally, Lena showed up, and not alone. She was holding Johnny, dressed in designer jeans and a leather jacket. When she saw me, she abruptly let go of his hand and came to me. "Hi, have you been waiting long?" As if that made any difference now. Everything was clear to me. Johnny couldn't get over the fact that I had a girlfriend. Like everything else, she had to be his. I silently shrugged my shoulders. "Edward, we don't need to see each other anymore." My ex-fiancée diligently averted her eyes. It seemed that in her trembling voice from the excitement concentrated all the universal sorrow. I fell in love. "Lena, I understand everything, no need to explain." I caught my brother's triumphant look, turned around and headed for the exit from the park. The next day I went to the enlistment office and asked to join the army. My father took my decision indifferently. I didn't explain the reason for my decision. My mother didn't care about me. At this time she was busy with another shopping spree somewhere abroad. So within 2 weeks I received a summons. I went through the medical examinations and was drafted into the internal troops. I was assigned to a reconnaissance unit of the internal troops after carefully examining my body for the presence of tattoos. At my perplexed look, the warrant officer paramedic said, "A tattoo is like a business card for a scout. All you have to do is put your last name on your fifth place to be happy. Remember, kid, tattoos are for convicts, morons, and prostitutes." And so began my service in the intelligence service. I was a tough and stubborn guy. I soon began to make progress in the service. By the end of my first year, I was already a sergeant branch commander. I tried to study military work well. I completed a sniper course, learned to drive a car in extreme conditions. I got good results in hand-to-hand combat. Several times I was in hot spots with my company. For participation in one operation, I was even awarded a medal for bravery. I don't know for what reason my call sign was Jack. This happened 2 months before I finished my service. I was ordered to deliver an artillery spotter and cover him while he worked. The task of the squad was simple. Stay unnoticed as long as possible and identify as many enemy targets as possible. And that was it. Get away as quietly as possible. Artillery worked next. The spotter had just finished transmitting the coordinates of the target when a machine gun hit us from the rear. The spotter shrieked and dropped his head. It was quite dark and I could hardly make out the silhouettes of the enemy. I tried to use the intercom to contact the company commander, but all I could hear in my headphones was crackling. The enemy was intelligently jamming our frequency, preventing us from establishing a stable connection. No one was firing from our side anymore. My men were probably all dead. I turned to the dead spotter and, covering his body, flipped the radio switch. I switched to the alternate frequency and began transmitting my coordinates, thus causing artillery fire on myself. The machine gunner detected my movement and opened fire again. I could feel the bullets digging into my dead body. I was not scared. I was just already mentally dead, clearly understanding that only a miracle could save me. The last thing I remembered was the whistling of shells and the rumble of explosions all around me. Then the rest of my squad broke through to me and dragged me, stunned, to the rear. I didn't even have a scratch, only a slight contusion. Apparently, God still needed me for something. Just before demobilization, all of us who had survived the battle ordered a souvenir medallion from a jeweler I knew. We had the material, a broken silver pectoral cross. There was enough for all of us. Only 7 people survived that battle. The time of service flew by quickly and I was soon discharged. At the train station, to my great surprise, I was met by my former fiancée, who was in tears. Lena clutched frantically at the sleeve of my camouflage and sobbed hysterically for forgiveness. I even felt a little sorry for her. But I ripped her fingers with painted red nails from the sleeve and, without saying a word, went to the cab rank. She remained standing on the platform, hands clasped in despair, looking at me with weeping eyes. Traitors cannot be forgiven. Yes, she must not have had a good life with my rich brother. My parents had moved to a mansion outside the city. Johnny, who had graduated from a technical university in the capital and was already the vice president of my father's firm for economic relations, lived with them. I did not go home. I stayed with a bachelor friend from the army for a few months. I submitted my documents to the Machine Building Institute. I arranged my lodging in a dormitory. I had no desire to meet my relatives, let alone my brother. A month after my return, my grandfather found me. We were drinking tea together for a long time in a small room in the dormitory. And then he suddenly offered me a job at the factory as an auxiliary worker in the machine shop. What did you think, a director? I needed the money. The work schedule was flexible enough, so I took it. I didn't really make friends with anyone at work. Nobody knew me. I mean, nobody recognized me. I worked like that for almost 5 years. I met Samantha, a nice girl, at a party, and after 6 months of courtship I married her. I hadn't planned a big wedding, but on the day of the wedding my parents and Johnny came to our banquet. Samantha was shocked. She stared at my brother and me for a long time, wondering at our resemblance. My father gave us an apartment and a car for our wedding. My young wife was over the moon. She did a slow dance with my father and brother. And at the end of the evening, I happened to catch Johnny's lustful gaze on my wife. A year later we had a son. I was happy as if I was in outer space. We lived without communicating with our relatives. Johnny came to visit us a couple of times. But no creeping in the direction of Vicky on his part, I did not notice. 6 months ago I successfully graduated from college, and my father appointed me deputy chief of marketing in his firm. I went into direct subordination to my brother. Business trips began, audits, signing contracts everywhere Johnny put me. My wife was initially unhappy with my frequent absences, but then got used to it. That's how we lived all this time. The car swerved. Damn, I must have dozed off. Took it to the side of the road and pulled over, turning on the hazard lights. Got out of the car and did a few push-ups. Patted myself on the cheeks. I was falling asleep early, it was only the first hour. I started off smoothly. The road snaked under my wheels like a gray snake again. Around another turn, the headlights illuminated a large black car pressed against the side of the road. I could see a thin woman's silhouette struggling desperately between two large black figures. She had no chance of success. The highway was deserted at this time, and there was no help to be had. I looked up at the sky. The ragged disk of the moon was casting a gentle glow over the road. There was no Batman in sight. And there's no such thing as a Batman in our neck of the woods. Who screams in the night, caught in the clutches of ruthless predators. Alas, such is the prose of life. Tomorrow they'll find the body of a young girl in the roadside bushes. And the detective, not yet sober from his drunkenness, will be swearing to himself as he surveys the scene. A criminal case will be opened, which will never be solved. After a while, the girl's body would end up in the cemetery, and the file would eventually find its way into the archives. I got out of the car. 2 big guys were dragging the girl, who was desperately struggling, into the black SUV. She tried to scratch and bite, but a whipping slap put a stop to those feeble attempts. The SUV's rear right window was lounging, and a light cigarette smoke swirled from it. Finally, the guys twisted the woman and carried her to the car. It was clear how this mise-en scene would end. Real life is different from the happy endings in the movie world. But sometimes there are exceptions. The thugs paid no attention to the blue Suzuki. I walked leisurely toward the black car, hiding my baseball bat behind my back for the time being. And they told me it wouldn't come in handy. Yes, you do. The girl realized that the situation had changed and started lashing out again. I came close to the participants in the crime drama. Apparently, some subconscious dashing fighters realize that the approach is not just a sucker. The brutal sense of danger had entered their unburdened brains. Let go of the girl, I said firmly. And as soon as the nearest bandit tried to say something, I struck him in the face with the bat, without a swing. Just like the instructor Petrenko had taught me, there was a distinctive crunch and he fell on his side. The second one let the girl out of his hands and rushed at me, tilting his head like a bullfrog. I took a step to the side and punched him in the temple with my knuckles. He collapsed on his colleague without a hitch. The car door slammed. The third character in this play appeared. A pistol glinted in his hands in the moonlight. I stepped out of the line of sight and was beside him in one leap. I gripped the Beretta from above and pressed the magazine release button. I heard it drop to the pavement. At the same time I turned on the safety flag. The subject, who did not understand anything, squeezed the trigger again and again, but no shot was fired. That's a shame. Give it back. I took the gun out of the poor guy's hands and knocked him out with a blow to the back of my hand. I bent down and picked up the magazine. There was silence. The girl was gone. A red shoe and a purse were lying on the pavement. I took out the knife and carefully cut all 4 tires. Sharply honed, the Tonto cut through the Michelin rubber easily. I took another look at the battlefield and headed for my car. I slipped my trophy pistol under the seat. In a moment I was back on the highway. 500 meters later, I saw a limping girl walking quickly in my direction. She didn't even think to hide in the roadside bushes. I pulled up beside her. Get in. I opened the right front door. She stared at me stunned. Get in. Don't be afraid. They're gone. She stood silent for a while, then hesitantly climbed into the front seat. Here you are. I handed her a bag and a shoe. It looks like yours. She silently took her things and held them to her chest. She did not look in my direction. Where are you going? I asked the right question. To my surprise, she called my city. I smiled and increased my speed. As we arrived, I knew her story. The girl's name was Helen, 20 years old. Her father was gone. Her mother was drunk. Last year, Helen graduated from high school and came to the capital. Didn't get into university. She tried to find a job but she couldn't. A friend suggested she earn money with her body. A pimp showed up. Passport was taken away. Been in the profession for over a year now. As long as she's young, she's a success. Then they put her on pills and sell her to an underground brothel. In 3 years, she'll die of an overdose. It's a short but true story of a night butterfly. Tonight, the pimp drove her and her friend to a client. He loves the young ones. The girlfriend stayed and she drove home to the town I live in. On the way, the cab driver started pestering her, got his, and threw her out of the car. Then these 3 men showed up in a black Lexus. There's no telling how it would have ended if it hadn't been for me. We got into town early in the morning. I took the passenger to the address, a dilapidated 1-story cinder block hut, and I drove home myself. On the way, I stopped at a convenience store and bought a bouquet of flowers, chocolates, and a bottle of champagne. There was an unfamiliar car parked in my driveway. Weird. I went up to my floor and opened the door to my apartment. I went into the kitchen. I put the bottle on the table and made my way to the bedroom. Trying not to make any noise, I opened the door. They were lying in their arms like newlyweds. Samantha laid her head on his hairy chest, sniffling sweetly. It was idyllic. I slept next to her, or rather my other self, my twin brother. He didn't even cover himself with a blanket, exposing his bosom. I went back to the kitchen and opened the champagne. Then I went back into the bedroom and started pouring the voluptuousness. Samantha woke up and, seeing me, rolled off the bed. Edward, don't. I'm begging you. That's not it. She didn't scream. She squealed, breaking into a falsetto. Johnny, seeing me smirked in without covering himself, stood up and stretched. You're early. I grabbed him by the throat with one hand. I just had to squeeze my fingers and that was it. Well, where are you going to kill me? My brother smiled defiantly. She's been my woman for a long time now. I'm just taking what's mine. I shifted my gaze to Samantha. My wife wrapped her knees and burst into sobs. Forgive me, forgive me. I love only you. She kept repeating it like a spell. I wish I knew what that love was called. That's when it hit me. How long have you been together? I looked at Samantha. Enough to give birth to a son. Johnny answered for her. I felt like a sledgehammer blow to the head. A son. Dima is not my son. I suddenly began to suffocate. Everyone knows it except you. Johnny laughed. Let go of me. He threw my hand away. My punch to the jaw lifted his body above the floor. Johnny flew over the wide bed and collapsed, hitting his head against the wall. Only his bare feet were sticking out from behind the bed. Samantha in her corner was already calling someone on the cell phone. Come quickly. Edward's here. My first wish was to get out of here as quickly as possible. I couldn't be in the same room as those freaks. The corrupt wife, who had been having an affair behind my back for almost 5 years, and the idiot Johnny. I couldn't call him a brother. I didn't want to get into the philosophy of family relationships. It just made my fists itch. I even began to fear that I would just kill him first, and then this thing that took over the body of my beloved woman. I went into the kitchen and poured a glass of vodka, which happened to be in the fridge. I was about to drink it, but I stopped. I put the glass on the table. One should drink with joy, not with sorrow. Something told me that I had to stay sober, and that this was not the last event of the day. I was right. The front door slammed and my parents flew in, out of breath. I sat in the kitchen and looked out the window, gathering what strength I had left to calm down. My father came into the kitchen. Where is Johnny? What have you done with him? I expected all sorts of things, but not this kind of care. Ivan, Johnny is here. Mother's voice came from the bedroom. Father rushed into the bedroom. There was a commotion. Apparently, they were bringing my wife's lover to his senses. I was disconnected from everything. I didn't care what happened next. I saw no sympathy for my father, only concern for the fate of his beloved son. He and mother were aware of everything, knowing full well about the connection of this scoundrel with my wife. They knew about the son. They knew and kept quiet. Or worse, they knew and supported him. I felt so disgusted that I wanted to vomit. I automatically started calculating my next move. It was clear that my marriage was over, my job was over too. I cannot see this creature who was once my brother every day. I have to move out of the apartment. Samantha crept quietly into the kitchen. Edward, it's your brother. I just couldn't resist. You have the same face. Dimka is not a stranger to you either, his own nephew. You won't leave us, will you? Edward, don't be silent. Samantha whimpered, wrapping her arms around my legs. Beat me if you want. Just don't go away. I was so squeamish that I got up and went to the window. The sun had already risen, and its rays were reflecting sunlight off the Vitara parked right under the window. I was finally able to pull myself together. The true reasons for my long business trips became clear. While I was away solving company business, Johnny was sleeping with my wife. My parents came into the kitchen. Edward, do not make a tragedy of what happened. We are one family and we have to stick together. My father began. Don't make any rash decisions. I've already made my decision. I only have one question. Did you know about this? Did you know my son wasn't mine? I spoke calmly, even casually. Not a muscle flinched on my face. My father was silent. My mother cried softly. Everything was clear. It was Johnny, their favorite son. How could he be deprived of another toy? But Samantha, why did she do this to me? Did she fall for the money? Was she in love so much that she decided to give birth to another man's child? Or was it just a woman's stupidity? I went silently into the corridor. My father tried to block my way. You're not going anywhere. He grabbed my sleeve. Get your hand off me. He sensed something in my voice and quickly took his hand away. I'm going away. Don't try to contact me. You don't have a second son. You never did. I'll file for divorce today. I looked at Samantha in a suit to an old paternity. Dimka has a real father, so let him raise him. He's your son. He loves you. You won't leave him and me. I won't give you a divorce. Samantha was hysterical. My father slapped me on the cheek with his palm. What are you talking about? Get over yourself. It's your wife and son. I grabbed him by the chest. The mother cried out. Edward, don't you dare. It's your father. If you touch me again, I'll kill you, you old idiot. I pushed my father away from my mother. I took my unpacked bag, walked past smirking Johnny, who was standing in the bedroom door, and out to the stairwell. Edward, don't go. Vicky's hysterical scream was the last thing I heard before the door slammed shut. I was choking with rage. I stared blankly in front of me for a while, then started the engine and drove along the white line-painted curb. There was Johnny's smirking face in front of my eyes. With what pleasure I would have smeared his insolent face on the wall. But was it worth the jail time? I think not. In the end, I was alone with no wife, son, family, job, or place to live. Zeroed out, so to speak. Well, I had to find some way to settle in. I took out my cell phone and dialed a familiar number. At the other end, very quickly answered. Hello, Elephant? I ran the car with one hand and held the cell phone in the other. It's Edward. Got a minute? Hello, Jack. To my army friend, I was still Jack. He stubbornly refused to call me by my name. It used to annoy me a little, but now I feel a little warmer in my heart. I need to stay somewhere for a while again. I haven't decided whether or not to tell a friend about my troubles. I have problems. I don't have a place to live yet. I see. The Elephant caught my thoughts on the fly. Let's go to my place. There's a place here. Half an hour later, we were drinking scented tea in the kitchen. I categorically refused the offered food. After what I'd been through, I couldn't eat a bite down my throat. My cell phone beeped. On the screen popped up a name, Samantha. I dropped the call. Fight with his wife. Pouring me a hot tea with a wry grin, he asked. It is much worse. With a sigh, I answered, it is much worse. The Elephant was silent with understanding. He knew what worse meant. Well, are you ready? We can go right now. My friend looked at his watch. It's not far. In the private sector, half an hour away. I didn't drive fast behind the Elephant's car. Indeed, we took the dirt road and 20 minutes later, drove up to a small house, standing in the back of a neglected plot. An inheritance from my grandmother, an elephant. I don't know what to do with it. I'm sorry to sell it, but I have no time to do it. So far, I have made a man's den here. Come on. Elephant opened the lock on the gate and let me through. The cabin led to the barely visible path in the grass. Well, here, look. The Elephant gingerly opened the door. Live as long as you like. He came to a cast iron stove standing almost in the middle. There is wood. The stove heats up very quickly. A couple of stacks and it's hot in here. You can keep warm in your underpants. Besides, it's not cold yet. The Elephant opened the flap and looked inside the cast iron fireplace. Well, I have to go to work. And you make yourself comfortable, and if there's anything, call me. He went out, and after a while I heard the sound of a car driving away. I went to get my bag, took out my jeans and t-shirt. I hung them on the back of the chair. Let them hang up because they were crumpled up in the bag. I looked around curiously. The inside of the house was clean and cozy. The cabin itself was made of pine logs, and the room had a persistent aroma of resinous pine. On a thin carpet over the sofa hung several hunting knives without sheaths and an old rifle without a bolt, giving the whole room a hunter's charm. The sleepless night was making itself felt. I turned off my phone, covered by a blanket, and fell asleep on the couch. I walked across the day's sun-heated sand. Everything around me was full of some wild beauty. The night sky was strewn with green twinkling stars. There was a girl standing beside me, and I held her hand tightly as if I was afraid she would leave me, dissolve in the serene silence of the night. She wrapped her arms gently around my neck and her lips met. But my heart was filled with anxiety at the imminent disaster. I knew that at some point the girl would disappear, and there was nothing I could do about it. Don't go away, I whispered in her ear. Just don't go. When I woke up, it was almost dark. I tried to remember the dream that had slipped away, but my brain refused to obey me. All that was left was the longing gnawing away at my insides. I looked in the refrigerator. I see. It would be strange if there was something there. I pulled on my jeans and t-shirt, laced up my sneakers, and threw on my camouflage jacket. I put on my favorite black baseball cap without a visor. I locked the front door and headed for the car. It was already perceptibly cool. I rolled down the window and pressed down on the gas pedal. The car raced along the ring road, torpedoing into the night air. I did not know the area well and oriented myself by the glowing storefronts. The private sector was replaced by two-story barracks, built at one time for the mill workers. Some of the windows were lit up. At the end of the street, I saw the green window of a grocery store.
Now start second story.
The mines went off in sync. For a few seconds, bright flames illuminated the jungle. The sound of an explosion followed. Above the big hangar, a bright blaze of fire erupted. A short time later, the ammunition warehouse burst into flames. Fragments of structures and roof fragments flew in different directions. Then the shells and rockets stored in the warehouse exploded. It was like a New Year's Eve fireworks display, bursting with bright lights. It even felt like I was back in my childhood. On my shoulder rested the heavy hand of combat. "Stop staring, let's go." He gave me a gentle nudge. "Give the order to retreat." "I'm Harpoon 92, to the rendezvous point." I repeated the command several times and let go of the tangent and went to reception. All groups acknowledged the command I had received. The bushes swayed a little to my right and I saw Koida. Without saying anything, he threw his machine gun over his shoulder and pointed his hand in the direction of the assembly area. We drew up in a single file and started to make our way through the thorn bushes. It dawned instantly here in the tropics. It was light by the time we reached the designated spot in half an hour. Having sent out a reconnaissance party and assigned 2 men to the rear guard, we started on our way back. I walked ahead with my weapon behind my back, my navigator on, and a glowing green screen from time to time. So far so good. We were alert, ready to engage at any moment. In perfectly fitted gear, with ammunition and equipment in their patch pockets and pouches, the soldiers sprang after each other, keeping their distance. The only indulgence I could allow them on the march was to loosen the straps on their protective helmets. I checked the navigator again. The river was near. Soon the jungle would be over and we would be on the bank. There was a booming thud from above. I put my binoculars to my eyes. I could see black spots as they came swiftly into view. The 2 planes were taking their time to make a turn and then, as they neared ground level, launched volley after volley of unguided rockets. In the morning sky, there appeared white traces of rockets rushing toward us. Having dropped their lethal load, the aircraft gently rocked their wings and went right, almost engaging the treetops with their wings. Ahead, 500 meters away, bright flames burst into flames, explosions broke out, and black smoke rose over the forest. We were just about to run. It was clear that we had been spotted. At last, we saw a gap in the dense trees ahead. I looked around. No planes were in sight. They had used up all their ammunition and gone back to base. But we mustn't relax. I took my flare gun out of its holster. The flare, a green star, burst upward from the narrow river valley overgrown with thorny scrub. We took up a circular defense, listening intensely to the silence. In about 20 minutes the sound of screws was heard from the north. It was getting closer, and soon 2 low-flying machines appeared over the forest. It was obvious that the pilots had given full power to the turbines, going into a steep turn to throw off the enemy's supposed anti-aircraft gunners. It was as if they were connected by an invisible thread and synchronously repeated each other's maneuvers. As they approached their targets, the pilots pressed their helicopters ever closer to the ground, almost touching the treetops that were whizzing by from below. "Attention, stand by." I gave the command and raised my hand. "I'm Ambassador 22. We're landing." I could hear it through my headphones. The steel dragonflies hovered over the beach and began to descend slowly onto the rocky shore. As I watched the landing process, I suddenly could clearly see through the dust a group of armed men walking down the high bank of the river. They were about 300 yards away. 10 o'clock, enemy," I commanded curtly. To my right, with an intricate swear word, Koida fired a long burst from the RPK. The pursuers quickly scattered among the rock debris and returned fire. The lead wasps snapped at the lightly armored hulls of the helicopters, and 2 or 3 of them hissed inside, luckily not hitting anything. Combat muttered and turned to me. "Come on, load up. I'll get in a second helicopter." I lay my face on the burnt African grass and watched the bullets create dust fountains all around, as fragments of stones and scraps of turf scattered. It didn't take long to load, and in a few minutes everyone was in position. As I pulled myself together, I picked up the moment when the enemy weakened their fire and wanted to jump quickly inside the helicopter. And then they got me. It was like being hit on the back with a red-hot rod. My legs buckled, and I realized that I was not going to make it to my helicopter. But Koida, running behind me, picked me up by my belt and threw me into the chopper in one fell swoop. He jumped in last, continuing to fire his machine gun. The enemy now and then changed his position, persistently firing at the helicopters. But we managed to hold them to the ground with heavy fire. I saw several camouflaged figures dashing around. I felt no pain, but I could hear the blood running down my back. I pushed my hand into the back of the pilot. Let's go before they shoot us down. The turbines whistled a little louder, and the helicopter sped upward, leaving the riverbed, under the protection of the high bank. The second helicopter followed, and a second one dropped on its tail. The helicopters raced over the river, blasting the brown waters with their propellers. I pulled my flight helmet over my head and tapped into the flight line. The valley is too narrow, and they might get us if there's an ambush ahead. Rumbled through my head. And then, as if reading my mind, a stinger hit us from the right bank. It was so fast that the pilots of the second helicopter had not even noticed when it launched. The rocket hit right on the port side. Instantly the contact fuse went off, and the steel dragonfly turned into a shapeless ball of fire, scattering debris, hit the water scattering a myriad of fiery spray, tearing human bodies to shreds. I looked at Koida. He nodded. Combat was no longer with us. I groaned mentally, staring at the rapidly rising column of thick smoke behind me, and fell into blackness. I was badly wounded. It was a very dangerous wound and I had lost a lot of blood, and when I was taken to the hospital I was in critical condition. I grew up without my mother. She left me and my father when I was barely a year old. I found out a long time later that she had run off with a lover. Apparently, there was no place in her happy future for me. My family tried not to mention my mother. Only once my grandmother said that my mother had gone to get a happy life, and was now living somewhere abroad. I did not specify anything, and my grandmother never returned to this conversation. My father never married, devoting all his time to work. Did he love me? It was hard to say unequivocally. At any rate, I lived at my grandmother's, and my father occasionally visited me, bringing me some penny toys. He devoted his life to work and his career. He got lucky and now owned a big, thriving construction company. A year later, my grandmother died and bequeathed the apartment to her other daughter. By that time I had gone to military school, and the question of housing did not interest me. After graduation, my military service began. Being on my first leave, I met Vera. We immediately connected. I returned to the service with a young wife. A year later, my daughter Sasha was born. Our little family went through a lot of trials and safely made it to our 20th anniversary. During all these years, Vera not only has not lost her attractiveness, but on the contrary, she has become even more beautiful. When you love someone, everything seems better than it really is. The only thing that overshadowed our life was business trips. But it seemed to me that the separation made our family even stronger. I am now 41 years old, and Vera is a year younger. She's had a pretty good career. She is now the head doctor of a huge medical center. As it turns out, she is a great organizer. I am still in the army, but I have already decided to end my career. Enough is enough. It is time to devote myself to my family. Especially now Sasha is expecting a wedding, and it seems that the long-awaited grandchildren are just around the corner. We bought a 2-bedroom apartment, and we're about to start building a cottage in a prestigious area. At the beginning of September I left on a business trip. When I left, I told Vera it was for the last time and that I would stay home for good. We stood and kissed like crazy for a long time and then I left. I threw back the tent flap and stepped under the sun-heated tarpaulin. To the left, the blades of a big fan rustled, creating the illusion of a cool breeze. "Sit down, Edward." Koida used his boot to pull a folding stool from under an aluminum table. Then he deftly poured vodka into the aluminum mugs. "Saved it for a special occasion." He nodded at the bottle. "I didn't think it would be like this." We drank in silence and poured a second one. "To combat, may the earth be his." Koida closed his eyes. He was silent. "Good luck, don't disappear." I stood up. The colonel stayed here. He had nowhere to go back to. No family. No home. I didn't know exactly what had happened in his past life. But there was clearly something that was keeping him from living in this world in peace. Koita sighed and filled his mugs. Come on, let's have some of that. No sooner had my plane landed than I tried to call Vera. I couldn't wait to tell my wife that I was home and that I would see her soon. But her cell phone didn't answer, so I called her at work. The phone picked up her secretary. Hello. Chief Physician's office. What can I do for you? On the tube sounded an unfamiliar voice. Hello, may I speak with Vera? I asked politely. Vera is not at work. Who is calling and what can I say to her? The secretary was no less polite than me. It is her husband. I really need to see her. Can you tell me where she can be? The secretary was silent for a while, as if collecting her thoughts. Then she hummed and said, if it is a joke, it's a very bad one. And, without saying goodbye, hung up. I stood there for a few minutes, unable to collect my thoughts. What the hell? I took a cab and drove home. When I opened the door, I walked into our apartment. I got the impression that no one lived here. I ran my hand over the kitchen table. Dust gathered on my finger. The situation was becoming more and more incomprehensible. I went to my room and took off my uniform. I wondered where my wife was. I called my daughter. Her phone was also disconnected. Where the hell are they? Rinsed myself in the shower and changed my clothes. Took a bottle of whiskey out of my duffel bag and poured half a cup. I didn't understand anything yet. After half an hour, I got dressed more or less decently and called a cab. I decided to go to Vera's place of work to do a reconnaissance of the area. Mingling with the crowd of patients, I slipped past security and made my way to the front desk. He who has ears, let him hear. Two young women were loudly discussing the upcoming New Year's Eve party. It was to be held today in the restaurant at the Plaza Hotel. I listened. The girls were rambling on until they announced the time of the party, 6 p.m. For some reason I really wanted to attend this event. I was not surprised to see a sign on the door announcing that the restaurant was closed for the event. I have been here several times before with both my wife and friends. The restaurant has separate dining rooms and I assumed the party was taking place in one of them. The big man blocking the doorway looked at me suspiciously. Do you have an invitation? Oh shit. I tried calling my wife again but her phone was still disconnected. I turned to the man at the door. Look, it's a corporate event at the regional medical center. My wife is supposed to be there. I just flew in today and I can't reach her. Her name is Lev and Vera. She is definitely here. I tried to explain. The security guard shook his entrance by invitation only. I have strict instructions. No invitation, no entry. I can't do anything. You can just give her the message that I'm here. I tried to keep my cool and not push it. I could see that the guard was hesitating. Then he said something into the microphone sticking out of his breast pocket. A few minutes later, the door swung open and an unfamiliar young woman came out to us and gave me an intriguing look. I repeated to her what I had told the guard. Can you prove that you are the husband of Vera? I threw her a surprised look. Of course I can. And who are you? I rummaged in my pocket and handed her my passport. I am Elena, her personal assistant. The stranger answered by scrutinizing the document. Check the marriage stamp. I prompted her. She checked, looked at the guest list on her phone and gave me a confused look. Vera is here. She hesitated for a moment with her husband and daughter. I stood there as if stunned. In my head rang 1,000 bells. With her husband? I muttered. And me? Then who? The woman shrugged her shoulders. Another guard loomed up behind her. I'll let you through, but I hope you will not do anything stupid. The woman turned to the guards. Let him through. As she passed, I heard Elena say softly to the guard, keep an eye on him. From behind the closed double doors at the far end of the foyer came the sounds of music. I dropped my jacket in the check room and went into the hall. The restaurant's large banquet hall was decorated in New Year's Eve style. In the middle of it, There was a large Christmas tree decorated with toys and illuminated garlands, the top of which reached the ceiling. Tables were moved and set to one side of the room, leaving space for couples to dance in front of a low stage where a live band played, providing the music. Apparently there was a break and people were hanging out on the dance floor. My eyes worked in alert mode, as if scanning the dimly lit hall. Vera was nowhere to be found. Suddenly I saw Vera's deputy staff member. I knew him, he had been to our company several times. I approached him and politely took him under my elbow. "Hello, Vadim. Do you know where Vera is?" I asked, overhearing the music. He threw me a shocked look. "Don't worry, she's fine," he said, but as he spoke there was something in his gaze that flickered across the hall, making me nervous. Then he gestured toward the far end of the hall. I went down that way, making my way carefully between the dancers. From the corner of my eye, I saw that Vadim continued to stare at me dazedly. Vera, dressed in a short burgundy dress, stood surrounded by men. Next to her, wearing a chic tuxedo, stood an imposing man. He held her by the elbow with one hand, and discreetly stroked her backside with the other. Our daughter Sasha was standing next to her. They were discussing something merrily and laughing from time to time. I came almost close and asked loudly, "Vera, what's going on here?" She flinched as if struck and slowly turned to me. "Edward." "How did?" she said, and without saying anything, she fainted in the arms of the man standing behind her. I turned my gaze to my daughter and shuddered. She reeked of icy cold. "Help me. Vera is not well. She needs to be moved to the restroom." Vera's companion picked her up in his arms and carried her toward the door. I did not understand anything. "Wait. That's my wife. Get your hands off her." I took a step toward the man holding Vera. He shuddered, hearing the anger in my voice. Elena, who was standing nearby, looked at me frightened. She touched a finger to her ear and said, "Guards, Wait." I looked at her. Who is this man? Why is he groping my wife with his hands? But no one answered my questions. Everyone, including my daughter, stood there and looked at me in silence. Why is he still here? Where are the guards? The man was already shouting. I froze in place. I wanted to go over to Vera to help, to tell her that I loved her, that I hadn't stopped thinking about her for a second, but I couldn't make my legs obey. But the other half of my brain was thinking at the same time about who was around my wife now, how far their relationship had come. I turned to my daughter. "Sasha, will you please explain?" Sasha looked at me with ill-concealed contempt and anger. "You have ruined everything." She turned away. She didn't even say "Daddy." I was picked up by the guards who came to the door. I saw Vera, who had fallen unconscious, being carried out of the hall. The picture in my eyes began to blur. It was clear that I could get nothing now. I could knock out half of those present, including the guards, and I would probably end up behind bars. Then I certainly wouldn't know what had happened. I threw up my hands and left without looking back. The whole situation was strange and clearly out of control. "My jacket," I said sharply to the woman behind the checkroom counter. While I waited for her to bring it in, the door opened behind me. I turned around, still hoping for something. But there stood the freak who had been with Vera, with a contemptuous smirk on his face. "You lost, warrior. Both she and her daughter know that I am the better choice for them." I roared and took a step toward him, clenching my fists. But I was stopped by the large hand of the guards standing between us. "I'm sorry, but I have my orders." "You must leave," he said. "And you," he jabbed at Vera's companion, who stepped aside and stood in the open doorway. "Will you please go back into the hall?" I took my jacket, walked through the front door, and dove into the dank chill of the December night. The security guard watched me closely as I hailed a cab. I still had hoped that the door behind me would open and my wife and daughter would hurry after me. A yellow cab pulled up to the curb. I climbed into the back seat and gave the address. I had to get my things. I didn't want to stay in that apartment. I asked the driver to wait, quickly went up to the apartment and gathered my stuff. I stared at our wedding photo, which was covered with a thin layer of dust. Then I sighed and slammed the door, leaving my past life behind. Now I have to look for shelter. I would probably have to rent something for a while. I got on the phone again. There was plenty of housing. I searched through the ads and found a suitable option. For a relatively small amount of money, a small studio apartment was for rent in the old part of town. I dialed the number. The small two-story house, made of red brick with a red-painted roof, resembled a fairy tale gnome. The five-story buildings blocked the sunlight, and during the day the gnome was always in shadow. Apparently this is why the price was relatively low. There were only 4 apartments in the house. A small front garden had been laid out in front of the front door, but now only the stalks of last year's weeds were sticking out of the snow. The landlady met me on the porch. We said hello, and the old woman invited me up to the second floor. It was my grandfather's apartment. We had wanted to sell it for a long time, but he flatly refused to move. He said only after his death. She said, heavily climbing the steps we took his things out. Only the furniture is left. It's old, but you need something to eat and sleep on. The landlady met me on the porch. We exchanged greetings and the old woman invited me up to the second floor. It was my grandfather's apartment. We had wanted to sell it for a long time, but he flatly refused to move. He said only after his death. She said, heavily climbing the steps we took his things out. Only the furniture is left. It's old, but you need something to eat and sleep on. The landlady opened the door and turned on the light. I went into a wood-finished hallway. The door to the only room was open. The room was a long, wide rectangle. A thick burgundy carpet covered the parquet floor. Dark oak panels rose from the floor to halfway up the wall, where antique, barely faded wallpaper rushed toward the high 4-meter ceiling. There was an old sofa in the room with a broken leg that had been replaced by several books. Opposite the sofa was an iron bed, topped on both sides with nickel-plated balls like cannonballs. There had once been paintings on all the walls, even in the kitchen. Now there were nails hammered into the wall and rectangles of unfaded wallpaper in their place. Grandpa played a little. The landlady caught my gaze and said. I stepped closer and ran my fingers over the strings. There was a rattling sound of a distressed instrument. I was satisfied. The hostess took the money and disappeared. I wanted to eat, so despite fatigue I had to go get some food and drink. I closed the door, went down the street and headed to the supermarket, which was not far away on St. Street. After walking around the sales floor, I loaded the cart with groceries, paid and rolled it to the counter. I took out a bag, reached for the cart intending to move the groceries, and came face to face with a homeless person. I wanted to chase them away, but for some reason I felt sorry for them and even gave them some bills. To my surprise, I saw that it was a woman. I took the bag and hurried to my temporary shelter. I forgot about the homeless woman instantly. I got home just as the snow began to fall in earnest. Finally, I sat down on the old worn leather couch and closed my eyes. Thoughts assaulted my brain. What had happened? Why was my daughter talking to me like that? And my wife? She fainted when she saw me. It looked like I wasn't expected and had been written off from all accounts. My cart was bursting with money. At least there was no problem here, but the rest was a mess. I decided not to be so hot and not to worry myself unnecessarily. Everything would be solved sooner or later, but one thing I was sure as it was will never be. I must have dozed off because I woke up to a strange sound coming from the front door. I cautiously looked out of the room. Someone was trying to open the front door, but the key sticking out of the keyhole at my side was interfering. Someone fiddled with the lock and, realizing that the lock would not open, fell silent. I stood up and listened. It was quiet behind the door. You can't hide from problems, you have to solve them. I went to the door, turned the key and jerked the knob sharply toward me. It was half dark on the landing. The dimly lit, fly-covered light bulb could not fully illuminate the stairwell. Someone on the right stirred. I turned my head. The homeless woman I had seen outside the supermarket was staring at me frightened. It looked like this woman was as hard to get rid of as a cockroach. Where did she come from, watching me? We stared at each other in silence until the door downstairs slammed. She ran in here. You stay downstairs and I'll go upstairs and take a look. A voice came from downstairs, and someone shining a flashlight started up the stairs. Police. That was all I needed now. I grabbed the homeless woman by the dirty collar and pushed her into the apartment. Carefully, so as not to make any noise, I closed the door and turned the key. I turned to the woman and put my finger to my lips. A voice sounded behind the door. There's nobody here and the attic is locked. All right, let's go. She's not going anywhere. Sooner or later she'll get caught. Heavy footsteps rumbled up the stairs. The door slammed. I looked cautiously out the window. A police car with its blue blinker on was pulling away from the house. You can stay here while the cops are here, I said. Then get out of here. Thank you, she said quietly. Look, I don't want to offend you, but you're as dirty as a sack of potatoes and you stink. There's a bathroom over there. Go and wash up. When I said that, I felt sick. Good Samaritan. Maybe she's sick or lousy. The only thing I need right now to be happy is a louse. Throw her out and be done with it. What about the police? All right, she'll wash up and get out. But there was something else that kept me from throwing her out. Maybe the feeling that I myself was homeless like her, only with pockets full of money. Without saying a word, the woman went into the bathroom. After a few moments, I heard the shower running. I went into the room and pulled a towel out of my duffel bag. Then I opened the bathroom door, expecting the shower curtain to be closed. She was standing in a very deep cast iron tub with the shower on full blast and fiercely washing the dirt off herself. She stood with her back to me and hummed. I was amazed. It was like a work of art. She reminded me of a picture of Europe emerging from the sea. The woman's skin was a pale, milky color as she washed off the dirt and soot. The washed hair fell in a white wave down her back, ending at her waist. Several fresh bruises were visible on her back. Her legs seemed very long. Her hips were narrow and her butt was nicely shaped. I had an idea that if you cram a few portions of food into her fifth place would be impressive. It was as if the stranger felt my gaze and turned around. I saw her breasts. They were not very big, but very appetizing. The woman blushed and stared at me point blank. She stood there, making no attempt to cover herself. May I continue? Did you see everything you wanted to see? She asked me a little angrily. Are you by any chance a pervert? Just bought a towel. I muttered and felt that I was beginning to get angry too. Fuck you. I hissed. No one asked you to come here. You're free to leave at any minute. I kicked the pile of dirty clothes in her direction, squeamishly. Wait, she said and lowered her arms, revealing her body completely and added doomfully. Look if you want. I didn't mean to stare at you, I said conciliatorily. I knocked but you didn't hear me. I hung up my towel. Then why did you stand there and look at me? She asked. Because I'm a normal man, I said. And man, that's how you spell man. When we see women without clothes, we get dumb. But I'm dirty and ugly. She started. And in addition, blind. I said. So, I'll just take your dirty rags and bring a tracksuit. Walking out of the bathroom, I sighed heavily. I needed to get out of this room before she noticed how hard my little brother was. During the time I'd been on a business trip, I hadn't been with any women. I knew beautiful women were like an expensive car, nice to look at and think about, but only theoretically. Beautiful women were too expensive, too difficult to handle, and totally unreliable to mess with, especially since I was married. I closed the door and stuffed her dirty, stinky clothes into a garbage bag, then put them out in the stairwell. Returning to the room, I pulled out my tracksuit. It would be too big for her, but it would do for a while. Then I caught myself thinking, for now, am I going to keep her overnight? A strange woman? Where to put her? There's only one bed. The other half of my brain whispered, and where to put her in the cold? Call the police again. I decided to let her sleep until morning, and I could sleep in a chair at night. Looking out the window, I saw that the snowfall had intensified. Flakes of snow filled the street and the roofs of houses. Okay, let it stay until morning. The door creaked open, and a woman dressed in my tracksuit entered the room. She'd tucked the sleeves and pants up, but it's still humming her like a hanger. Is the police car still there? She asked. It looks like they're gone, but I don't know how far. Maybe they just turned off their blinkers and lay low, I replied, trying to put some fear into her. But you can't leave yet anyway. I threw away your stinking rags. What am I supposed to do now? She said helplessly. I have nothing else to wear. Stay till tomorrow. I will give you some warm clothes and you can go anywhere you want, I answered. What am I supposed to do until tomorrow? She looked at me, frightened. Let's go to the kitchen.
Now start second story.
I stood by the window and watched as the car backed down the driveway, turned right, and then disappeared down the street. I wondered why I wasn't more upset. I had just seen 10 years of my life drive away. Shouldn't I have felt something? Shouldn't there have been more than just a shrug of the shoulders? Oh well, I guess I should go and take care of that dripping faucet. As I turned and headed for the kitchen, I replayed the events of the last half hour in my mind. I had come home from work to find my wife, Peggy, sitting at the kitchen table with a full glass of wine in front of her. I knew something was up as soon as I saw her there. First, she was home before me and she never got home from work until a half hour to an hour after I did. Secondly, the understanding we had was that the first one home would start dinner, and there was nothing on the stove. Lastly, there was the glass of wine. Peg rarely drank. I was no sooner in the room than she asked me to sit down and told me she had something to say. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, sat down across from her, and she said, Rob, I know you know this, but there has been something out of sync between us for the last 6 months or so. I have no idea why we seem to be moving away from each other. I don't know if it's something to do with me or something to do with you, but something is wrong. I've tried to talk with you about it, but all I get from you is that we are just going through a rough patch and it will get better. I've decided that we need to separate. I'm not talking divorce, just separation for a while. I think I need some space, Rob. I need to get away, look at my life, and see if I can figure out where the disconnect between us is coming from. You can use the time we are apart to look at the same thing from your angle. Oh, come on, Peg, it isn't that bad. Sure, we are having some problems, what marriage doesn't? But two people can't work out problems if they're away from each other and not talking. Talking isn't going to help, Rob. You only see one problem with our marriage. As far as you're concerned, the only problem we have is that we aren't making love. Your solution to the problem is for me to get naked and let you have your way with me. As far as I'm concerned, there is a lot more wrong. We don't make love anymore because I don't want to. We don't snuggle or cuddle anymore because I don't want you touching me, and I don't know why I don't want you to touch me. I still love you. I love you as much as I did on the day we were married, but something is wrong and I don't know what it is. I need some space, Rob. I need some time alone so I can figure things out. So you want to pitch 10 years of marriage out the window? No, Rob. I just think we need to spend some time apart. I've already packed my stuff in my car. I'm going to stay with my sister until I can find a place. I'll call you once a week to keep in touch. She stood up and said, I have to go. I told Mary that I'd be there by 7. She turned and walked away without even offering to kiss me goodbye, and that in itself told me where I stood. It didn't take long for the word to get around that Peggy and I had separated. Most of our friends were sympathetic and went out of their way to try and cheer me up. Peggy called me once a week and asked how I was, and I would say I was managing. Then I'd ask her how she was and she would say that she was okay. I would then ask if she was ready to come home yet, and she would tell me not yet. Peg had been gone for 6 weeks when I started hearing disturbing things like she had a live-in boyfriend. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to believe that things were as she said they were, that she just wanted some time alone to get her head straight and then would be coming home. I kept hearing things, so I decided to check out the rumors. I'd find out where Peg was staying, do a little snooping, and put the rumors to rest. But no one could tell me where she was staying, either they couldn't or wouldn't, and I began to think that something about the situation stunk to high heaven. I was having dinner with my friend Tom and his wife Tanya, and I voiced my concerns, letting slip that I was going to hire a private detective to find Peg and either confirm the rumors or disprove them. I saw Tom look at Tanya, and I saw her give him a little nod. Save your money, Rob, Tom said. The rumors are true. Most of the people who know you know what is going on, but they like you too much to tell you. Tell me what? That Peggy left you to live with Adam White. Adam White? Who the hell is Adam White? I've never heard of him. He works with Peggy and she just up and left me to go live with him? That doesn't make sense. If she was going to do that, why didn't she just divorce me? What's with the separation? You know Peg, Rob. She makes fallback plans and then makes plans for if the fallback plan doesn't work. She's been seeing White for almost a year, and I'm guessing she did this separation thing so she could come home if living with White wasn't as good as having an affair with him. And everyone knows this, but no one would tell me. Gee, what a great bunch of friends I have. I stood up, threw my napkin down in the center of the table, and said thanks a bunch. I'll see myself out. I left their house. On the drive home, I thought about what I had just learned. No sex with Peg for over a year because she didn't want to make love with me. No snuggling for over a year because she didn't want me touching her. And all the time she was having an affair, I sat at home like a fool, behaving myself while I waited for the unfaithful 304 to come home. And all my friends, my wonderful friends, knew all about it and just let me sit there, staring at the walls and waiting. Well, the waiting was over. The next morning I made an appointment with the Corliss Investigative Agency and gave them a retainer. I told them where Peg and this White guy worked and asked for all the dirt they could get on the two. Then I went home and started making a list of everything I needed to do to sever my relationship with Peg. I'd wait until I had the report from the detective agency, but when I got it, I would have my list and be ready. Once the list was made, I sat back and thought about something else I needed to do. I hadn't been laid in almost 16 months, with Peg denying me for a year and then a separation. I had been a completely faithful husband, but now that I knew what Peg was doing, I damn sure wasn't going to remain celibate any longer. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping a beer and making plans to end my long dry spell when I remembered what Tom had said about Peg. She plans everything. After living with her as long as I had, I knew that was true. To me, that meant she had plans for what to do if I found out about what she was doing, plans based on how she thought I would respond to finding out. And the biggest plan of all, how to stick it to me if she decided that living with White was what she really wanted to do. I could see her having me watch so that if I went out and strayed, she would be able to use it against me in a divorce. All of a sudden, the list I had made seemed worthless because she might have planned for my reaction that way. It was back to the drawing board and a new list took shape. As it took shape, I saw that a lot of what I wanted to do would have to be done right away, not left until the last minute. There were also some things I could do that would stick it to Peg and make her suffer. I smiled at the thought and wondered if she had a plan for when something like that happened to her. The next morning I went to my bank to deposit my paycheck. While I was there, I checked on the safe deposit box Peg and I had. I saw from the sign and log that Peg seemed to check the box at least once a week. When I saw that, I knew she was keeping track of me and that at the first sign that I was onto her, she would pounce. I thought about that for a minute, then took the 5 certificates of deposit from their plastic envelopes, went upstairs, and used the bank's copy machine to copy all 5. I then put the copies back in their envelopes and returned them to the box. Unless Peg took the CDs out of the envelopes to check them, she would never know about the switch. Since I knew Peg was checking up on me, I took my passport from the box and casually mentioned to the woman from the bank, as she put the box back in its slot, that I was going down to Mexico on a fishing trip. I left the bank with the 5 CDs in my pocket. I normally went to the bank twice a week on average, and each visit I would cash in 1 CD, pay the early withdrawal penalty, and then hide the cash away. When I got home, I wasn't a believer in credit cards. I thought you could get in trouble too easily with them, so the only ones I had in my name were an American Express card, on which the full balance had to be paid when you got the bill, several gasoline company credit cards, and 1 Visa card with a low limit that was in my name only. Peg, on the other hand, had a good half-dozen credit cards in just her name, and some of them had high limits. I knew what the limits were because I paid the bills every month. I made a list of the remaining account balances and set it aside. I would make sure to pay the minimum payment on those cards to keep them in good standing. I sat down and made a list of all things I would like to have. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, I went on a spending binge using Peg's credit cards. When I bailed, she would be saddled with the credit card debt, and I intended to make it considerable. I updated my computer, got a new Dell with all the bells and whistles, bought a Remington 700 on eBay, and a bunch of other stuff like a digital camera and a state-of-the-art cell phone that did everything but cook my dinner. The house was Peg's. It had been left to her by her parents, so I would have no claim on it. However, we had used it as collateral for an open line of credit when we put in a swimming pool and hot tub, and both of our signatures were on the account. We had paid off what we had borrowed, but the line of credit was still open. If I timed it right, I could draw on that line before she knew what I was doing. I had wondered why, when she decided we needed a trial separation, she packed up and left me in her house instead of asking me to leave. Now I knew. If I was still in the house, I would obviously be expecting her to come back and see this separation as something that wasn't going to last. Next, I closed out my 401k at work, paid the penalty, and squirreled away the cash. Then I sat back and waited for the private detective's report. The one thing I couldn't figure out how to do was get my ashes hauled. I couldn't take the chance that Peg had someone watching me to see if I went looking. I decided what I would have to do was leave town on the weekends to go on fishing trips. She knew that I loved to fish and went quite often, and she knew from the catches I brought home that I actually went fishing, so I doubted she would pay a private detective to follow me. No need for her to get too carried away. After all, wasn't I stupid? Hadn't she been pulling the wool over my eyes for over a year? It was a Friday, and I was just getting ready to leave work when I got a phone call from Tanya asking me to stop by their house on the way home. I tried to beg off, but she told me it was important, so even though I really didn't want to go there, I said I would. When I got there, she let me in and led me into the living room, where I found Tom sitting in an easy chair. He got up, offered me his hand, and I shook it. Then he told me to sit down and get comfortable while he got me a beer. Tanya needs to talk with you, Rob, and you need to know that I'm 100% on board with what she's going to say, he said. He left the room and headed for the kitchen while I gave Tanya a questioning look. She said, "In a minute, Rob, you're going to need some beer for this." Tom came back, handed me a Bud Light, and said, "I've got some errands to run and probably won't be back before midnight. Catch you later." He headed for the front door and I heard it open and then close behind him. The door closing was Tanya's signal to start talking. "Rob, you heard us when you stormed out of here the night you were here for dinner," she began. I started to say something, but she held up her hand and said, "Let me finish. You were justified, but it still hurt. In our defense, all I can say is that we like you a lot and didn't want to be the ones to hurt you. It gets a little complicated in that we are friends with Peg also, and we were hoping she would get her head on straight and go home to you where she belongs. We know you love her, or at least you did love her, but we didn't know if it was enough for you to forgive her, so we kept quiet. If you got back together and didn't know, you could have gotten on with your lives without having to worry about forgiving and forgetting. That's it. That's our apology. But that is only part of why Tom and I wanted you to stop by. We know you, Rob, and we know what kind of guy you are. You would no more cheat on your wife than you would rob a bank. How long has it been since you had sex?" The question caught me totally off guard. For the first time I noticed how Tanya was dressed, a low-cut blouse that showed off her ample cleavage, a short skirt, and high heels that showcased her marvelous legs. Friend or no friend, I couldn't help but get an erection. Then I remembered Tom's "I'm 100% on board" comment, and I had an idea where things were going. In a subdued voice, I told her that it had been a year and a half. She leaned toward me, giving me a look down inside her blouse, and huskily said, "I'd like to change that, Rob. Tom's my friend, Tanya. I can't do that to him." I started to get up, but she grabbed my arm and pulled me back down. "Tom's okay with this, Rob. That's why he left, to give us some time alone. This isn't pity sex. Tom and I have talked this over for months now. You have something we want, so hopefully I can help you and you can help us." "I don't understand what you're saying," I said, bluntly. "To be blunt about it, Rob," she continued, "Tom is sterile and we want a child. We want you to give me one." I was stunned. I sat there and stared at her, speechless. When I finally did find my voice, I said, "You just said that you knew I wouldn't cheat on Peg." "Yes," she said, as she laid a hand on the lump in my trousers. "But that was before you knew what Peg was doing. Now that you know, you're released from your vows to her." "Why me?" "We wanted to be with someone we know, not some anonymous sperm donor. We also want you to be part of the child's life. You will be the godfather and will always be around as Uncle Rob." "This doesn't make any sense," I said. "Of course it does. What if something happens to Tom and me? Who better to take care of the child than Uncle Rob? On the flip side, God forbid, what if the child needed a liver transplant or something like that? Could we find the anonymous sperm donor? And even if we did, would he help? If we got on a waiting list, how long would we have to wait to find a donor who would be a match? No, Rob, we thought it through. We want you to be part of our family. On the other hand, are you going to tell me that you don't find me sexy? Tanya asked, looking at me and starting to touch me. This says you do. She pulled me close and added, there are benefits to being the father of my child, Rob. We will have to make love many, many times to make sure that I get pregnant. I won't limit you to just the days I'm most fertile. In fact, I won't even tell you when they are. It could take weeks, Rob, weeks and weeks. And you've been without for how long? We will help each other, she said as her lips closed around my neck. It had been a long time for me, and I knew I wasn't going to last long. Now we can go into the bedroom and do some serious baby making, Tanya said. All my reservations about what was happening disappeared when she gave me a blowjob, so I got up and followed her into the bedroom. I thought about what had just happened all the way home. As I pulled into the driveway, it occurred to me that if Peg was having me watch, she would find out about my visits to Tom and Tanya and notice that Tom left, but I stayed for several hours. The next morning I called Tanya and explained my thoughts to her. She told me not to worry, that no one would see Tom leave because he didn't. He went down to his basement workshop and stayed there until I left. That information gave me peace. It was one thing to make love to Tanya when Tom was gone, but could I do it if I knew he was in the house? Tanya must have known what I was thinking because she said, "Don't worry, Rob. It will be okay. I promise." That afternoon, I got a call from Tom asking me to have a drink with him after work. Talk about awkwardness. Try sitting down with a guy you've known for 20 years who is a good friend, and whose wife you've just slept with, all with his knowledge. He must have known what I was thinking, so he cut right to it. I know this is awkward for you, Rob. Hell, buddy, it's awkward for me too. But I have to talk with you about the situation we're in. First off, and I told you this when I left you and Tanya alone, I am 100% okay with it. I mean that, Rob. But that said, I have to tell you that Tanya didn't tell you the full truth. I know she told you about wanting a child and about me being sterile, but I also know that she didn't tell you the rest of it. To be blunt about it, buddy, I can't get it up. I haven't been able to make love to Tanya in over a year. My God, I said. That was why she was so hot last night. She was playing catch-up, and her telling me that she didn't want to give Tom sloppy seconds was her way of covering for his impotence. She didn't want me to think less of him as a man, not that I would have, but she didn't know that. What a difference between her and Peg. Tanya put Tom first, even in difficult circumstances, while Peg thought only of herself. I don't know if it came through to you last night, Tom continued, but Tanya is an extremely sexual person. My not being able to perform was driving her up the wall. She has tried hard to hold it together, Rob, but sooner or later she was going to cheat on me. I know that seems harsh, but that's what would happen. I know she loves me and would do her best to hide her cheating from me, but I would know. How could I not? If she got laid, she wouldn't be climbing the walls anymore and I would notice. I love her, Rob. The woman is my life. If I didn't have her, I would just die. And that's the problem. If she snuck off and cheated behind my back, I couldn't live with her. I would understand why she did it, but I couldn't live with the dishonesty of it. The only solution, at least as far as I could see, was to make it happen out in the open. But Tanya isn't the kind of woman who would agree to taking a lover and going into the bedroom while I sat in the living room and watched TV while she screwed. She could probably have done it with a stranger in a motel room with me not knowing, but she couldn't just do a guy with me knowing, and then a different guy the following week and another the week after that. What we needed was someone steady, someone we both liked and were comfortable with. We sat down and made a list of possible candidates but couldn't agree on anyone. We kept coming back to you, but we were afraid that if we started with you and then Peg came back home, it would stop and we would have to start over. Peg would eventually come back to you. Everyone who knows Adam White knows that he's an a-hole, and Peg would soon find out and go home to you, secure in the knowledge that you had no idea what she had been doing. I have no idea why she thinks you were that dumb. I can only guess that she thinks you love her so much that the thought would never occur to you that she might be up to something. I had a chuckle at that. She pretty much read me right, because that's exactly how it went. It was only because the separation was dragging on and on that I finally realized something wasn't right. Well, you do know now, and I know even if Peg doesn't, that now that you do know, she is history. I know you won't take her back under any conditions. That freed Tanya and me up so that we could approach you. Tanya and I want a child, Rob, and Tanya needs a steady sex life. Until the doctors can find and fix my problem, someone else is going to have to provide that sex life for her. I know it sounds silly to say this, but you making love to my wife is going to save my marriage. You just have to get comfortable with the idea that I know and that I'm alright with it. I didn't know what to say. The whole thing was so off the wall that even though it had already happened once, I was still having trouble believing it. Tom stared down into his drink, then looked up at me and said, "It kills me not to be able to take care of my wife, Rob, but it would kill me if I lost her. I need you to do this for me, bud. I really do. Can I count on you?" I stared at him for a few seconds and then nodded my head in agreement. On Sunday I had Tom, Tanya, and 3 other couples over for a barbecue. When the other couples had gone, Tom went into the den and played on my computer while Tanya and I went up to my bedroom. By the time I was undressed, Tanya was lying on the bed, imploring me to hurry. It was my house, Tanya, and on my bed. We'd do it my way. I kept her legs up on my shoulders so gravity would help my little guys in their race to her egg. After maybe 30 seconds, I told her to put a pillow under her hips, and then I let her legs down. Tanya looked up at me and said, "Ped walked away from this? The woman must be crazy or stupid." With that stroke to my ego, I just had to justify it, so I swung over her in a missionary position. As she said, "No, Rob, I needed to do its job," I laughed and said, "If any is still there around the opening, it isn't going anywhere anyway." 5 minutes later, I was driving deep into her for the second time. I saw that Tom knew what he was talking about when he said Tanya was a very sexual person. She got a third time out of me before I walked her and Tom to their car. Tom shook my hand and Tanya kissed me on the cheek. We all agreed that the day had been a success and that we should do it again sometime soon. Anyone watching would assume we were talking about the barbecue. On Monday afternoon, I met with John Abbott from the Corliss Agency. As he handed me the report, he said, "I'm sorry. Every time I do one of these things, I hope it's all a simple misunderstanding and that nothing is going on. But there is no doubt here. Your fee also covers our court appearance on your behalf if what you decide to do goes to trial." I shook his hand and left his office. On the drive home, I wasn't nearly as enraged as I thought I would be. It was probably because I had already accepted that it was true, and by the time I got the report, I had settled everything in my mind. What was I going to do about this situation? Nothing that I had not already done. The only thing left for me to do was time the draw on the house line of credit so Peg wouldn't know about it until it was too late. I would see an attorney and get the papers drawn up, but I would hold off on having them served until I was ready. For the next 5 weeks, I saw Tom and Tanya 3 or 4 times a week, either at their house or mine. They let it slip that I was going through a rough patch and that they were spending time with me to cheer me up. I got my weekly phone call from Peg, but I stopped asking her how she was and when she would be coming home. Finally, I'd had enough. I wrote checks against the line of credit, and as soon as they cleared, I found an apartment, moved out of the house, and had Peg served with divorce papers. I cited irreconcilable differences instead of adultery so Peg wouldn't know that I knew about Adam White. She would see it as my way of trying to push her into deciding to come home. She would call me, feed me a line about how I was overreacting, and then probably suggest that we meet someplace for a drink and dinner where she would try to calm me down and talk some sense into me. I would agree to meet her, listen to her, and then tell her I would think about it. It would buy me several days for the line of credit checks to clear and for me to clean out the checking and savings accounts. It went just as I thought it would. First, the phone call telling me I was being unreasonable and that there was no need for me to get attorneys involved. I told her I was tired of the neither fish nor fowl situation. "You don't want to be with me, so it's time for me to accept it and move on with my life." I agreed to meet her at Angelo's. It was the first time I'd seen her since she walked out on me, and she looked good. I was going to miss her, strike that. I did miss her. It was obvious to me that I still loved her, but even if she came back to me, I knew there was no way I could ever live with her again. I didn't tell her that, though. Instead, I sat there and listened to her feed me a line about seeing an analyst, helping Peg understand blah blah blah, and that Peg was making good progress and just needed a little more time. "I know it is hard on you, baby, but it's just as hard on me. Please, baby, just a little more time. I told her I would think about it and let her know. I waited 2 days and then called my attorney, telling him it was time to move to step 2. He withdrew the divorce papers and sent Peg a notice that the filing had been cancelled. I got a call from Peg at work, thanking me and telling me that I wouldn't regret it. I smiled, knowing that I didn't regret it but that she didn't know why. She would soon find out. That night I had dinner at Tom and Tanya's, and after dinner, Tanya and I retired to her bedroom. As Tanya spread herself for me, she said, "Can we make love tonight instead of just screwing? I'd like to make love to the father of my child." I asked if she was sure. Positive. The home test told me Tuesday, and the doctor confirmed it this afternoon. You're going to be a daddy. We only did it once that night, but it was a long, slow, and very satisfying session. When it was over, I told her it might be a while before I saw her again. I'm going to end the farce with Peg and White this week, and I may have to leave town for a while. Don't do anything too drastic, lover. I'm going to need the father of my baby to be around. That would be Tom. Sweetie, you need to start thinking like that. You know what I mean, lover. Just because I'm pregnant doesn't mean I'm not going to need you anymore. Adam White was a member of the Fraternal Order of Eagles, and since he had been elected Sergeant at Arms, he had never missed a meeting. He left Wednesday's meeting in a good mood. After talking to several influential members, he believed he had a shot if he ran for higher office in the order. He was still in that good mood when he got out of his car in the parking lot of his condo. He locked his car door, turned, and felt a blinding pain before everything turned black. He was found by a neighbor who called 911. The paramedics who responded rushed him to the emergency room, where it was discovered that both of his arms and legs had been broken, and there was damage to his genital area so severe that both of his testicles had to be removed. He was in great pain when he opened his eyes and saw he was in a hospital room, unable to move. He had casts on his arms and legs and was in traction. He saw Peggy standing next to his bed with a horrified expression on her face before he faded out again. I wasn't there when it happened, of course, but I received a full description of what occurred. When the man walked into the room, he approached Peg, who was standing next to the bed and looking down at White. The man asked her if she was Margaret Olson, and when she said yes, he handed her some papers and told her she had been served. She looked confused as she opened the envelope and saw that she was being sued for divorce, this time on the grounds of infidelity. She looked at the word infidelity, and then at the wreck lying on the bed in front of her. Her face lost all its color and took on a horrified expression as she understood what it meant. She moaned, "Oh my God," then sat down in a chair and started crying. I stuck around long enough for the police to ask me where I was that night. It turns out that I was at a poker game that started an hour before the Eagles meeting and lasted until an hour after White was admitted to the hospital. Peg paid for my alibi, although she didn't know it. The guys were on my side and would have done it for free, but the object was to stick it to Peg, so I used her credit to show my appreciation. Home Shopping Network charged her Visa card for the digital cameras I gave to Bill and Steve. eBay charged her MasterCard for the laptop I gave to Mike and the 19-inch flat-screen monitor I gave to Phil. She even paid for the aluminum baseball bat. I had 6 weeks of vacation and 3 weeks of comp time coming to me, so I took a 2-month leave of absence in conjunction with that time. When the police were satisfied that I had nothing to do with White's misfortune that they could prove, I made arrangements to leave town and take a fishing trip in Mexico. Before I left, I told my attorney not to push the divorce and just let it sit until Peg started fighting it, then to drop it. We would stay married, but I would have nothing to do with her. I called Tom and Tanya once a week to see how things were going. They told me Peg had moved back into the house, and as far as anyone could tell, true love must not have been in the cards for Peg and White, because she never went back to him after the day she was served while standing next to his hospital bed. The maxed-out credit card bills must have started hitting the mailbox, and she must have found out that the savings and checking accounts were dry. The line of credit was tapped out and the CDs in the bank deposit box were fake. The next word I got was that Peg was frantically trying to find me, and no one could tell her where I was. My boss, who knew the full story, told her I was gone when called and was trying to find me. He told her that I just came in one day.